real. The humor and observations that Helen put into her writing definitely reflected her own kind of dry sense of humor. Helen was described as observant and thoughtful, the type of person who noticed the small things about people and remembered. People around her described her as warm but not naive, independent but not distant, someone who valued friendships and relationships but also enjoyed having her own space. Now, outside of the writing and publishing aspect of her life, Helen loved to cook, and she was deeply attached to her adorable little doggie named Boris, who was very much her constant companion. And the life that Helen and her husband, John, built together was perfect until February of 2011. While the two of them were on a holiday in Barbados, Helen's 65-year-old husband was caught in a riptide, and he tragically drowned. In an interview, Helen described this moment as being a wife at breakfast and a widow by lunch. She was only 46 years old at the time. Now, something like this is completely life-altering. The couple had met when Helen was 23, and she was temping as his secretary at the licensing rights company that John ran. Now, despite the fact that there was a 19-year age gap between them, they married, and they had been together over 22 years by the time of John's death. So his death didn't just leave a gap in her life, it changed basically the only adulthood that she had ever known. But Helen used her passion to help herself heal. She continued writing, she continued working, she spoke openly about how difficult things had been. She created a blog called Planet Grief, where she documented her experiences after losing John, and it became so popular within the bereaved community that it led to her publishing a book in 2015 called When Bad Things Happen in Good Bikinis, exploring loss, grief, and what it looks like to rebuild a life afterward. And in case you didn't get it, the title came from a moment that Helen would never forget. Sitting in an ambulance in her bikini while EMS tried to do CPR on her husband and watching it fail. Now, Helen wasn't offering like inspirational slogans or pretending that grief followed some neat little timeline. We all know that it doesn't. She wrote about loneliness, the anger, the guilt, the little moments of humor that do exist among the everyday heaviness of grief, and people connected because she wrote about the things that they were feeling. So by the time Helen disappeared, she wasn't just a successful children's author. She was part of a community that admired her and trusted her and saw her as proof that even as unimaginable as it is to get past the loss of your spouse or someone you love, it is possible. Now, it is through this community that Helen connected with a man that we're going to talk about further. His name was Diane Stewart. Now, Ian was also a widower. His wife Diane had passed away suddenly in 2010 after suffering a seizure in their backyard. So by the time that Ian and Helen had connected through this group Their relationship blossomed slowly into something romantic. And, of course, there was some backlash from the readers of her blog about how quickly she'd moved on. Give me a break. There were, of course, others who were supportive. It made sense on paper. Here were these two people who had both experienced the loss of their spouses, who had rebuilt their lives from the ground up, and they were trying to keep going. So, in 2012, Helen agreed to relocate from London to Herefordshire, where Ian lived with his sons. And when I say they, I really mean she bought a property in Royston, a £1.5 million 7-bedroom house for her and Ian and his two sons to live in. Because remember, Ian can't work and he has no disposable income. But in Helen's mind, they were planning a future together and it was worth it. So Ian proposed and they started to arrange a wedding at a place called Brocket Hall, described as a gorgeous country estate nearby to where they lived. And after everything that Helen had been through, it seemed like maybe she was gonna come out of this okay, even though she would always miss John and Ian would always miss Diane. They were building this bond together. They didn't have to be alone forever. And for the next 3.5 years, everything appeared good. Until it didn't. In April of 2016, Helen disappeared suddenly. In the months leading up to her disappearance, the people that knew her had started to notice a change. Helen had always been one of those fit and active people who never seemed tired. But suddenly, she was tired all the time and she seemed spaced out. She had been doing things like forgetting she had Boris with her and leaving him places, poor little guy. And her mom had noticed and she was kind of worried about her daughter, but Helen said that she had no clue what was wrong. And her internet history would later show that she had researched, why do I keep falling asleep? So Ian told family and friends that he had come home to find a note from Helen, stating that she'd gone away for a few days. She did have a small holiday home in Kent, where she would sometimes go. So it wasn't unusual for her to kind of hunker down there writing and things like that. But what was unusual is she hadn't told anybody. Not her mom, not her friends, not anyone. Just Ian in this note that she left behind. Not even face to face. Now, people thought this was really strange. So Monday, April 11th was when she had supposedly gone away. She had been seen that morning walking Boris, and her internet history showed that she had been on the wedding venue's website. She had emailed a friend around lunchtime just to catch up, and then after that, nothing. By Friday, April 15th, her friends and family were starting to freak out a little bit. No calls had been answered, no messages returned. People had gone to the cottage in Kent, and it seemed like Helen had never arrived there at all. And at that point, after receiving quite a bit of pressure from Helen's family and friends, Ian finally called the police to report Helen missing. It was a call that kind of felt off. Here's this man who doesn't seem particularly fazed that his wife has been missing for 5 days. He cannot tell the police what color her eyes are or her date of birth. And this is a woman that he's getting married to soon. Yet he somehow knew that she'd seen a psychologist 10 years earlier, and he could list every herbal supplement that she took daily. He knew all these irrelevant details about her, but not like the very basics. Now, I do have to think about Sean's year of birth sometimes because it's not relevant in my brain, but I know how old he is and I know his date of birth, and I know what color his eyes are. After being together for 4 years, you would think that he would know this, but okay. Now, initially, police did not treat her disappearance as high risk. She's a grown woman. She had left a note. However, after speaking to Helen's family and hearing about just how out of character it was for her to be out of contact for this long and to just leave a note instead of actually telling people, they kind of upgraded the risk of this case. And this made quite a bit of difference because it allowed the police to trace her phone. And this is when they discover that her phone had been switched off since the afternoon of the 11th, and its last location pinged from her house. Not the cottage in Kent, from her house. So a full-scale search begins. Now at first, there's no obvious sign of a crime and no clear evidence of violence. But as investigators look deeper, the more things don't really add up. 20 to 30 officers searched the route around her house where she had last been seen walking little Boris. They searched the house itself, including the outhouses, the swimming pool, and the garages. Now, it's a big house, remember? Hundreds of hours of CCTV footage was reviewed, particularly around the local train station, because if Helen had gone to the cottage in Kent, she must have taken a train, because both of her cars were still at the house. The police searched the cottage in Kent, but as her family had already discovered, no one had been there recently. The police perform a press conference asking the public for any help and relaying the fact that they are not convinced that she had not gone off of her own accord. Chief Inspector Julie Wheatley said, "Helen, if you are missing of your own volition, that is fine. That is absolutely fine. We respect your right to do so. But just let us know that you are safe and well." But even after this press conference, no tips come in, which is absolutely bizarre to me. How many cases have we heard of where thousands of irrelevant tips come pouring in? Nothing. So as concern for Helen grows, Ian releases a public statement of his own. A written statement in which he says, "You not only mended my heart 5 years ago, but made it bigger, stronger, and kinder. Our plans are nowhere near complete, and without you, there is no point." So it seems like the words of a worried fiance, yeah? Y'all know where I'm going. So the search of the house did not produce anything conclusive, but investigators did notice that Helen's laptop was exactly where she usually left it. Now, for most people, that probably really doesn't mean a whole lot, but for Helen, it's her career. Her laptop was how she worked, how she communicated, and really how she spent most of her time. And the fact that she had left it behind was just another detail that did not quite fit into the story that Ian was telling. And by this point, the police have found quite a few of these little tiny details that are adding up, including what they found next. In 2012, after John's death, Helen had changed her will, leaving her fortune to her brother and her best friend. Now, in July of 2014, she passed away before they were married. All of that amounted to an estimated £3.3 million that Ian would stand to inherit if Helen was no longer around. So that might scream motive to some people, like myself, but simply being named a beneficiary in someone's will doesn't really make you guilty. On its own, it's just a check mark in the, hey, you're suspicious column. But other things are filling the check marks in this column as well. In the middle of the investigation into his missing wife, Ian decides he's gonna go on a holiday to Mallorca, I think I said that right, 2 weeks in the sun. And his argument for this was, well, she'd paid for it all before she went missing. Come on, if Sean went on a vacation, I would be so mad, because he didn't even know if I was alive, and you're going to the beach. No. So, another check. The police then look into Helen's bank accounts, and they find out that her money had been untouched until a month after she disappeared. And when they investigated the transaction that occurred after, it turned out that Ian had used her bank account to renew their football season tickets. So not really an arrestable offense, but another check. Some more time passes and no new leads are coming in, no tips are coming in, until a neighbor makes this offhanded comment that cracks this whole case wide open. Helen's friend and neighbor mentions to investigators that there was a cesspit on the property, which this is news to the police because they had searched that house inside and out, and they hadn't found one. But the neighbor explained that the garage had been built on top of it, and the only access was a small manhole inside the garage itself. A manhole that had been covered by Ian Stewart's car. So the police returned to the property on July 11th. So if you're counting, if she disappeared on April 11th, May 11th, June 11th, July 11th. And for the first time, Ian Stewart seems kind of nervous. Within days, they had placed him under arrest on suspicion of murder while they excavate the area to reach the cesspit. 4 days later, they make a devastating discovery. Helen Bailey's body was found in the cesspit, and next to her was her beloved dachshund, Boris, along with a couple of dog toys and a blanket. The two of them were submerged in liquid, which included human excrement. This creepazoid had knowingly placed her in an area where every time he flushed his toilet, the contents went straight on top of Helen and Boris. So putting aside that for a minute, the fact that Boris was there too reveals exactly what kind of man Ian Stewart is. Killing a dog isn't an act of rage in this case, it's a calculation. Everyone who knew Helen knew that she didn't go anywhere without Boris. And if Boris had still been at the house, foul play would have been immediately obvious. So, Ian is formally charged with Helen's murder. And he was charged with murder, perverting the course of justice, and preventing a lawful burial. And he pled not guilty. And his trial was set for January small details that on their own might not mean a whole lot, but together painted a very big, clear picture. Helen's autopsy revealed that she had been drugged over an extended period of time with a sleeping medicine called Zopiclone. I don't know how to say that one. The very same medication that guess who was prescribed? Ian, for his very well documented insomnia. If you're gonna poison somebody, don't use one of your own prescription medications. Dum-dum. I've researched too much true crime. When Ian had allowed everyone, including Helen herself, to put down what he had allowed everyone, including Helen herself, to mark down as exhaustion or even hormonal changes, had actually been this creep keeping her drugged. The prosecution's case was he'd planned to kill her, but he needed her weak enough that she couldn't fight back when it came time for him to suffocate her. And even worse than all of that is the pathologist testified that when she had been put into that cesspit, she had been unconscious and she had drowned. Now, on the question of motive, the jury heard about how he hadn't just been named in her will, he had access to her finances, he was the power of attorney, he had used that power of attorney to attempt to sell one of her properties while she had still been missing, before this man had even called the police. So in that 5 days that she was missing, he tried to sell one of her properties and told the solicitor that she was too unwell to attend the appointment. The same day that she disappeared, the day that he wanted everyone to believe that she'd just gone away for a couple days to write, he had increased a standing order from her bank account to his bank account from £4,000 or £400 to £4,000 a month. CCTV footage was also shown in the court capturing Ian at a rubbish tip the afternoon of her disappearance, disposing of what appeared to be a large white object, and the prosecution stated that it looked very much like a bloody duvet cover. The 999 call played in court as well, giving the jury to hear this man who couldn't even answer what color his fiance's eyes were, or the most basic questions about the woman that he wanted to marry. And when it came time for defense, Ian Stewart took the stand, and this man is crazy, y'all. He claimed that Helen had been kidnapped, that two strangers named Nick and Joe had taken her and demanded a ransom. And the only reason that he hadn't called the police is because he was trying to keep her safe. No, dude. So, of course, this story falls apart immediately. After all, going on a holiday for 2 weeks and buying football tickets hardly proves his point, and in an act of what I can only describe as spectacular stupidity, Ian had provided such a detailed description of Nick and Joe that investigators actually found them. Two men, genuinely named Nick and Joe, why not change their names, dude, who had known Ian from years back, were located, and it was quickly proven that they had nothing to do with Helen's disappearance. Ian, though, just doubled down and said it was a coincidence that he happened to also know a Nick and a Joe, and that they actually looked nothing like the descriptions that he'd given. My dude. So the defense then points to alleged sightings of Helen after the prosecution suggested time of death. The neighbors who believed that they had seen her walking Boris. But under a cross-examination, these accounts became vague, with one witness admitting that it may have been earlier than they thought. None of them could definitively place Helen alive beyond the estimated time of death. prosecution described Ian's version of events as quite absurd and said that he had grossly deceived Helen, having straight up love bombed her from the start while she was still overwhelmed with grief, with the sole purpose of stealing all her money. After a 6-week trial on February 22nd, 2017, a jury reached a unanimous verdict on all charges. Guilty. Ian Stewart was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years, meaning he'll be 90 years old before he's even eligible for parole. In his sentencing remarks, the judge did not display any niceties. He made it clear that he believed this had been planned in advance. It had been carried out for financial gain. It had involved sustained deception from the beginning. He specifically noted that Boris had also been killed because without that, the lies would not have held. And in the judge's own words, Ian had decided that the dog would also have to die if the lies were to sound credible. But I'm not done yet. Ian's downfall doesn't stop there. Because after his first conviction, investigators have turned their attention way back to Diane. If you remember, Ian Stewart's first wife, who'd had a seizure in the garden a year before he met Helen. At that time, her death had been treated as extremely tragic, but a natural event. A sudden seizure in a history of someone who didn't have seizures. But in light of everything that emerged about Ian, they decided that maybe they needed to dig just a little deeper. And the first thing they discovered was that Ian had received 3 lump sums after Diane's death. £28,000 from Cambridge County Council, a £33,000 life insurance policy, and further a £16,000 insurance policy. Diane's cause of death had largely rested on Ian's own account. He had said that he'd come from the shop to find her collapsed in the garden and told the 999 operator almost immediately, "I think she's had some kind of fit." But now that version of events was going to be properly scrutinized for the first time. A neurologist assessed that Diane's risk of dying from an epileptic seizure was actually extremely low. A forensic pathologist found no signs that were typically associated with that type of death. And crucially, specialist neuropathology testing on her donated brain tissue showed clear signs of oxygen deprivation over a sustained period of time, somewhere between roughly 35 minutes and an hour. This wasn't just a sudden collapse. Something had interfered with her breathing over time. So with those findings, Ian was arrested yet again for Diane's murder too. The prosecution's case, supported by medical evidence, was that she had been deliberately suffocated or restrained in a way that restricted her breathing. The jury agreed, rejecting the idea of a natural death, and concluded that beyond a reasonable doubt, Ian Stewart had caused her death just as he had caused Helen Bailey's. During sentencing, the judge highlighted the similarities between both killings. The method, the fact that both women had died at home, and the carefully constructed lies that followed each case. So in my opinion, Ian Stewart figured, well, I got away with it once. Why not see if I can do it again? So this case is such a tragedy to me. Again, she's somewhat of a celebrity to me. I know her books, I recognize her books, and as someone who has experienced way too much grief in my life, I can understand how easy it would be to bond with someone who has experienced the same or a similar situation as yourself. a lot of times in grief situations like this, you really do feel like no one understands what you're going through, and no one could possibly feel the same way that you're feeling. Now, again, I'm not a widower. I haven't lost a spouse. I've only lost siblings and parents and other people that I love, but never a spouse. So, I think that is probably different because it is the person that you choose. You know what I mean? Like, you have chosen to spend your life with this person, and for them to be tragically taken away from you. In Helen's case, she didn't have to worry about how she was going to financially be able to do it, but again, she had spent her entire adulthood, 20-something years with John, and to literally watch him pass away in front of you, the ramifications of that to your mental state have got to be greater than I could even imagine. So finding and bonding with someone like Ian, I think, would have been extremely easy to do, but Ian was a predator of his own type. To do this to a bereaved widower, knowing that you're playing on her emotions in such a way simply because you want her money and you don't want to work, literally makes me sick to my stomach. And the fact that you then threw her in a cesspit, drowned in her own excrement with her dog, is like the ultimate betrayal to me. I cannot, I don't have words for what a POS I think this man is. And it is absolutely horrible, horrible, horrible that he almost got away with this twice. Because y'all know that he would have just found another lady and done it again because, oh, well, it worked twice. And you can't tell me that his kids had no idea. I mean, he would have been living in that £1 million mansion with all of Helen's money, and just makes me sick. It just makes me sick. The audacity of some of these people. I'm not gonna say guys because it's also girls. Talking to you, Jodi Arias. To think that they can get away with stuff like this, and then to say that someone had taken her for ransom. Like, where did you come up with that goo-goo idea, my dude? Where's Boris? They took Boris too in their ransom attempt. Oh, well, we'll just take this dog that could bark, or come on, man, come up with something better than that. Like, Dodo. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here today. Let me know if you had heard of this case. I've been trying to pick some that are overseas and kind of maybe not nationally known here in the United States, because I feel like I always try to do, y'all know, some of the lesser known cases, and I think that my overseas viewers like to see some that are closer to home sometimes. If you have any case suggestions, please drop them down below. Also, please, if you're still listening, leave me some kind of emoji down below to help get my channel out there. I know that I haven't been posting a lot, but I think that the algorithm has started to hate me because I think that even my subscribers are not seeing my current content, and that is really discouraging. And if you have any ideas on not true crime content that you'd like to see, like some of you guys said that you really liked my recommended products video because you're kind of taking a break from true crime, I'm open to those suggestions as well. I want this heat to break so I can film more. As you can see, I'm glittering because it is hot. It is already 89 degrees here at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I'm going to end this with saying I love you so so much. Please like and subscribe if you're not already.